Welcome to another You Comment, We Respond. We got two hands for you today. The first one involves everybody's favorite, Darvin Moon.
Hey.
Playing in his famous World Series of Poker run. If you want to check that hand out, click right up there. It was a really cool hand. Really well played by his opponent, Francois Balmager, in our opinion. In which Joey Catta opened with King 5 suited. Balmager flatted 2 10s. On the button, Moon had Ace Jack. There were 28 left, so a big money jump was coming up. The flop was, what was the flop? King Queen 10.
Yes.
King Queen 10, so Balmager flopped a set of 10s and Moon flopped the nuts. Catta checks, Balmager bets, Moon just calls. The turn is a brick. Balmager bets again. Moon min clicks it, which is obviously terrifying. But Balmager can't fold with all of the equity he has against pretty much all of Moon's range. Calls. The river's another brick. Balmager checks again. Moon bets 2 million into a 6.5 million chip pot. Balmager only had 3 million before the bet went in. Balmager tanks and folds correctly. That was pretty cool.
It's a fantastic fold by Francois.
Yeah.
Here's what Adam Gill had to say about it. I think you guys have got this very wrong, at least on the flop.
That's a bit hurtful.
Yeah. I mean, you had to say very?
Yeah, I mean,
you just said wrong.
Very's just bad writing, by the way. Like,
wow.
You don't have to use very to emphasize your point. I mean, that's in classic English, all right?
Anyway.
I'm just a little salty.
Yeah,
no big deal.
It's okay. You can be defensive.
Yeah.
No problem. Anyway, Adam says, Darvin should not be raising the flop. This is mainly because he will never be balanced in that spot. I can't imagine Darvin ever bluff raising the flop because A, he can never have queens, kings, and shouldn't have 10s or king-queen when he didn't 3-bet pre-flop. Don't know if I
question that.
Don't entirely agree with that entire sentence. B, Joey Catta has yet to act and his range is uncapped and likely to include lots of strong hands on this flop. C, if Balmager will always call a raise if he has a jack. If he doesn't ever bluff raise here, he shouldn't value raise either.
Well, I understand that this is kind of a GTO thought.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, I want to say I don't think Moon's 3-betting king-queen pre-flop. That seems wrong to me.
And maybe not 10s
I also don't think Catta's uncapped. I'm pretty sure if Catta had the nuts, he was going to bet into 2 players on this flop.
Catta mostly is going to bet his strong hands here, right?
Yeah, it seems very likely. But let's get to the main point here, which is that Darvin doesn't have any bluffs, so he shouldn't raise when he has the nuts. I disagree. The situation warrants a raise because we're trying to get all of Balmager's chips, right?
Yeah.
And we don't block anything on this board, right?
Right.
And Balmager essentially doesn't have any bet folds unless he's bet folding ace-queen, right?
Ace-queen's the one clear bet fold.
Because he doesn't have a random bluff after he's not the pre-flop raiser, Catta checks, and he leads into 2 players. He always has something that can call a raise. Jack-10 at worst, we think.
Sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, so why wouldn't we try to get more value from those hands that might have to shut it down later?
So while balance is a good thing to be thinking about for sure, there are times when you just don't have to worry about that. By the way, guess what? Moon didn't get to stack him anyway because Moon isn't balanced, right? So the balance thing still comes back to bite him in the butt, whether he checks the flop, whether he calls the flop or raises the flop. Still gonna hit him somewhere. So I think raising, I agree with Grant, makes the most sense because it's hard for Balmager to fold.
Right, based on Balmager's range that we constructed for a very long time on our podcast and video last time. It just doesn't feel like he has any folds there. Let's build a pot.
Yeah, even though Moon is an amateur, he doesn't have to try and be balanced. He can be exploitative too.
Right, everybody can.
You can be like, it's okay, I don't have to have, I can always have it here. He still is gonna have to call a lot.
Right.
All right, Xavier Weisenredder says.
That's a sweet name.
I know. The GTO criticism, what are we calling with here?
On the river is Balmager, right?
Yes. Obviously, any Jack-9 we show up with, because that's the second nuts. But that seems super exploitable to fold the set here, especially when we already have so much 2-pair and maybe Ace-King and maybe King-X of hearts that we can fold. I guess we have a heart in hand to block King-10 of hearts and Queen-10 of hearts, although those 2 hands are doubtful bets. 10-9 of hearts and Jack-10 of hearts makes it a little more justifiable, but for that price, it's super exploitable to fold the set here. I get that it's an exploitative fold, but it still seems extreme.
It is extreme, but I think I want to echo the sentiments from the last comment. We don't need to be GTO against Darvin Moon in this spot. This is such an exploitative spot in general, not just against Darvin Moon. It's a once-in-a-lifetime spot. People play differently, and things mean different things. We're not going to be in this spot to be balanced again in the future.
Right. We're not playing up against Ben Lamb here or Tom Dwan. It's a different opponent. We can play differently as a result.
Right, and as we said in our podcast and video, We don't think Darvin Moon ever has a bluff at this point, right?
Right.
And he never has a worse value hand unless he has king queen.
That's the one.
Which we think is very unlikely anyway.
He might check it back.
At the same time as having 20 full easy combos of straights that he could have played this way, right?
Yeah.
So I think we can fold just because of that.
I agree. I agree, although I admit it feels very tight. And you can't be that wrong to basically say, in this situation, I'm just never going to fold the set. It can't be that wrong.
No, I mean, we couldn't kill him for calling, for sure.
Of course not.
Because, as you say, he has probably the third best hand he ever shows up here with a set of 10s. That doesn't mean he has to call in a tournament spot that is such a huge inflection point against a very exploitable opponent.
Next up, we have Tom Dwan lost his damn mind against Daniel Negreanu.
Lost his damn mind, he did.
It was a great hand for sure. It started with Lex Veldhouse opening with some hand.
Ace-9. It was an interesting situation in that it was the last episode of the season of High Stakes Poker, and they had bumped up all of the money. So it was $300 for the ante. $300 ante. Can you imagine? Anyway, everybody wanted to play. There was a lot of money on the line. Veldhouse opened with Ace-9. Negreanu called with King-10 of spades in the small blind. Dwan called out of the big blind with 9-5 of hearts. The flop was 7-7-3. Dwan led into both players with his nothing hand.
Two backdoors.
Two backdoors, sure, but basically nothing.
Nothing.
Negreanu kind of weirdly called with King-10 of spades here.
One backdoor.
Yeah, which we're going to actually get to pretty soon here.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting stuff. The turn was, what was the turn? It was a king.
Yes,
Gave
it
Negreanu
was.
the king, which was great. It went check, check. The river was a queen. Negreanu bet for value, near pot size. Dwan tanks, says stuff like, I hope you can't show up with Jack-10 here, because Dwan has 9 high and is considering calling, and ultimately puts the chips in the middle. Calls with 9 high, and obviously loses the pot. Even if Negreanu just turned over his 10, Dwan would have lost the pot. Yeah.
It's amazing. So we thought a lot of things about it. One of the things we talked a lot about, though, is we didn't think it was a great call by Daniel on the flop with his overs out of position. So Daniel Negreanu himself showed up on our YouTube page in the comments and wrote this.
Thank you for commenting, Daniel. We appreciate it.
We do appreciate it for sure. So in this spot, Tom Dwan's range on the flop is actually heavily weighted to queen high and worse. He was betting far too often in spots like this, and rarely did he show up with a strong hand. Any 7 he is checking to Lex. His bet on the flop just screams of weakness, and yes, my plan was to bluff the river. By check calling the flop, the hand I was really trying to rep is like 8-8. If Tom actually did have a decent hand, it's likely to be something like 6s. Against 6s, I have decent equity with a backdoor flush draw and overcards. In addition to that, I don't think he barrels the turn with 6s since he likely would be worried that I had 8s, 9s, or 10s.
Well, based on all of those assumptions, it makes the call sound pretty good.
It does.
I mean, that's from Daniel Negreanu himself, so I'm sure he's very good at making it sound good, and I'm sure he's right. The thing that really strikes me about this comment from Daniel is that he believes Dwan is never leading a 7 on this flop. That he's so crazy unbalanced. And that shocks me. And Daniel certainly knows better than we do. He played a ton with Tom Dwan over the years, so it might be true. But that kind of shatters expectations as far as balance and Tom Dwan are concerned in my mind.
I gotta tell you, I absolutely acknowledge Daniel knows more about this and Daniel's been there and we haven't. I haven't for sure. I haven't played against Tom Dwan. I've just seen him on TV like you guys. But I don't believe that Dwan never leads a 7 here. I think Dwan sometimes does lead a 7 into crazy Lex Veldhouse and calling station of Daniel Negreanu. I mean, I think he really does sometimes.
But if Daniel's right, I mean, that means Dwan is really a lot worse than I thought.
Yeah,
that's what that means, basically.
It seems impossible to me that Dwan is that bad, that he would bet here and not have trips at least some of the time.
It would be so easy to play against him in these spots then.
Right, and he's not easy to play against. He's one of the toughest players to play against.
But if that's true and Daniel put that all together, then, I mean, that's really cool.
It is really cool, for sure. And, I mean, wouldn't it have been amazing if it didn't run out, if it ran out Jack Queen instead of King Queen? Daniel does bluff.
And then Dwan calls.
Dwan calls. And by the way, if Dwan calls and doesn't say anything, Daniel may just muck his hand, but Dwan gives that whole speech and then calls. Daniel's going to turn over the King High and get to win instead of Dwan winning with 9 high.
Right.
Amazing. All right. Alex Schofield says, awful call considering that Dwan has a 5 in his hand.
Well, it is an awful call, and as you saw in the video, Tom Dwan acknowledged that it was an awful call.
Yes.
Although I don't think that's the main reason it's an awful call. The main reason is because Daniel can show up with this type of hand. That's what Dwan was contemplating when he said, I wonder if you could have Jack-10 here. You can't have Jack-10 here, right? Apparently Daniel can. That's what makes it an awful call. Sure, the 5 removes some cards of the gut shots.
I think there's something else that even makes it a worse call. It's the belief that somehow Daniel would play his gutters like this on the flop.
Yeah.
I don't really buy that he would.
Right.
I think Daniel's much more apt to donk it or to raise rather than to check call out of position with a gut shot. It doesn't make any sense to me. I think in position he might call, But out of position, I just don't think he's going to do that very often.
We did talk about the blocker a little bit, and we included it in our combinations. There were 10 combinations once you remove that card. It still makes it a bad call. I mean, it was a bad call anyway.
It was a bad call.
I don't think that's the main factor that makes it a bad call, but good point. Having a blocker matters.
Absolutely.